Deep Sea Embers Chapter 446 to 450. As soon as Duncan stepped into the grandeur of his captain's quarters, he found himself pausing, his attention irresistibly drawn to the commotion resonating from the forward part of the ship. The sounds emanating from there were undeniably those of Shirley and Dog, engaged in their usual playful mischief. However, there were no warning signs, no alarms to indicate an emergency. They're turning their responsibilities into a circus act again, aren't they? Duncan whispered to himself, a small grin spreading across his face. His attention then shifted toward the expansive nautical map that spread across a large table, depicting the endless waters they sailed upon. The wooden figure that served as his helmsman, sitting dutifully at the navigation desk, made a creaking noise as it turned its head toward Duncan. Crafted from oak, its eyes were made of obsidian, so dark they appeared bottomless. Yet, as Duncan entered, they seemed to glow softly, lighting up at the sight of their captain. Ah, the magnificent Captain Duncan honors his faithful first mate with his esteemed company. Today's catch is. Skip the catch, Duncan interrupted, eyeing the wooden carved goat head that functioned as the figure's head. With the recent disturbances in the Frost region, I'd be surprised if we could fish anything worth mentioning. The talking goat head hesitated, its wooden neck emitting a series of creaks as it tilted left and right in a momentary confusion. Finally, it spoke, well, if fish are not to be had, at least the morning is calm, sir. The wind is gentle, the sun is generous, it's a splendid day for a voyage. We could chart a course for Cold Harbor, if you're inclined. I've no inclination to get the vanished anywhere close to a city-state at this point, Duncan said, cutting the rambling goat head short. His eyes moved slowly over the large sea map that dominated his quarters. A ghostly mist hovered over the map, weaving and dancing lazily. A clearly marked route indicated their northward progression. Symbols on the map represented their ship, the Vanished, docked near the icy city-state of Frost and situated at the edge of where the sea mist was parked, which glowed in a haunting green light on the map. The sea mist seems rather tranquil today, Duncan observed, a half-smile forming on his lips as if a satisfying thought had occurred to him. It would appear that things are proceeding without a hitch. Without a hitch. Captain, are you brewing another one of your magnificent strategies? The goat head was instantly alert, its wooden neck stretching closer to the map in anticipation. What's afoot? Are you aiming to destabilize the already frail city-state? Or perhaps you're thinking of reclaiming the renegade ship, the Sea Mist? Your plans are nothing short of. Duncan cut off the wooden first mate with a sidelong glance. Is that really all your imagination can produce? Plots of thievery and subversion. Have you never considered more virtuous alternatives? Caught off guard, the wooden goat head took a moment to recalibrate its assumptions. Might you be intending to help Frost stabilize its governance during this tumultuous period? Or perhaps you're planning to steer Tyrion away from his rebellious tendencies and guide him back to a more righteous course? Duncan raised an eyebrow at the goat head. Where did you get those ideas? Captain, you may overlook it, but I do have some capacity for observation. During our time together, I've gained a deeper understanding of your character, the goat head replied, its voice tinged with a curious mix of pride and comfort. Its obsidian eyes remained expressionless as it turned its wooden neck deliberately. You're not the type to simply ignore what's happening in Frost. Unlike planned, Frost is deeply wounded by the ongoing calamities. Neglecting it could trigger catastrophic repercussions, and you. The wooden goat head paused, its creaking neck momentarily still as it searched for the right words. Then, with a tone of unexpected sincerity, it spoke again, and you're a man whose heart is imbued with compassion. Duncan didn't respond right away. He studied the goat head, its eyes as black as if crafted from voids that could absorb all light. After a protracted silence, he finally spoke, you're quite observant. For a moment, the goat head seemed to tighten, emitting a low creaking sound. That sounds like something one might say just before, permanently silencing a witness. But Duncan just laughed, shaking his head dismissively. You still haven't quite figured me out, have you? I appreciate observant company. Saves me a great deal of trouble. With a casual wave, Duncan dismissed the goat head and stood up, directing his gaze to an ornate, antique round mirror positioned nearby. As he looked into it, his eyes sparked with a soft glow, and the mirror's surface transitioned into an abyss of darkness. Out of this play between light and shadow, the figure of Tyrion began to emerge, rushing into view. Good morning, Tyrion. I hope I'm not interrupting your rest, Duncan said, his voice filled with a calm assurance as he studied the panting figure in the mirror. Did you sleep well? Tyrion in the mirror appeared tense, taking several deep breaths to collect himself before offering a rigid smile. Father, good morning. I was actually on my way to find you. Ah, yes, I slept well, thank you for asking. Why so formal? There's no need. Duncan adjusted his posture, a playful smile spreading across his face. Has my previous demeanor intimidated you? No, not at all. Tyrion abruptly straightened his posture, resembling a student caught off guard by a teacher's question. I just have great respect for you, that's all. Ease up. No matter how I act, you don't have to be so tense around me, Duncan said, shaking his head. Now, you mentioned you were coming to find me. What's the matter? Tyrion hesitated as if he was gathering his thoughts and choosing his words carefully. It's about Frost. I'm not sure how best to articulate this, but it seems that they want to. Before Tyrion could complete his sentence, Duncan interrupted, let me guess, they're offering you a significant role. A generalship. A high-ranking city position. Or have they simply offered you the governorship? Stunned, Tyrion looked up in amazement. How did you know? Duncan smiled, a touch of smug satisfaction in his expression. It's simple. I suggested that the Mist Fleet be granted entry into the city. Do you really think that an administration as chaotic as Frost's could make a unified decision so quickly otherwise? You're familiar with their bureaucratic labyrinth, aren't you? The look on Tyrion's face was one of bewilderment, tinged with a modicum of exasperation, as if he were internally debating whether his father was an enigmatic sage or an elaborate prankster. His eyes seemed to say, I spent an entire sleepless night contemplating life and my future, only to find out my father has been pulling strings. Opening and closing his mouth a few times, he refrained from voicing the irreverent thoughts that were swirling through his mind. Instead, he looked at Duncan with a face full of conflicting emotions. Why would you do something like that? It's quite straightforward, Tyrion. Frost needs you, and you need Frost. Duncan's face transitioned from a playful smirk to a look of grave seriousness as he spoke. From an internal standpoint, Frost is embroiled in chaos and could benefit greatly from a force strong enough to stabilize it. Externally, the Frost Navy has suffered significant losses, and the city-state is in dire need of formidable protection. Who else boasts both a strong track record in administration and command of a powerful fleet? Duncan leaned slightly forward, capturing Tyrion's gaze with his own intense stare. I gather you've accepted their proposal, which aligns perfectly with what I've said. Frost needs you, and you have something to gain from it as well. Tyrion's eyes momentarily avoided Duncan's gaze. After 50 years of piracy, a change of lifestyle doesn't seem like a bad idea. Be honest. Tyrion sighed. You personally intervened to save Frost. I don't want to see your efforts go to waste. Be honest. Fine. I admire the resilience of the people of Frost. They didn't buckle under the weight of catastrophe. Even when you weren't there, they held their own. I have to admit, I can't bear the thought of them suffering more in the future. Duncan simply watched Tyrion, saying nothing. Tyrion shrugged, I also don't want to see a land once under the protection of Queen Rhaenora descend into a long and irreversible period of darkness. Duncan still remained silent. Finally, Tyrion sighed, a note of resignation in his voice. That's it. That's good. Honesty is especially valuable when you're in front of me, Duncan said, resuming his earlier, more relaxed posture. So, what's your current situation? They've offered me the governorship, Tyrion admitted, his smile tinged with a mix of emotions. They've even drafted a slew of contingency plans for me. Duncan paused for a moment, deep in thought. Eventually, he exhaled softly, that's a bit bolder than I had anticipated. Tyrion looked at him expectantly, do you have any advice for me? Why would you need my advice? Duncan chuckled. You've followed the Frost Queen and commanded the Mist Fleet for half a century, interacting with every city-state in these treacherous waters. I hardly think I can instruct you on how to be a governor. I'd still like to hear your thoughts, Tyrion insisted. Duncan took a moment before speaking softly, just do your best. In a world as unforgiving as ours, there's very little else for people to fall back on. I understand, Tyrion nodded. Duncan acknowledged before suddenly shifting his attention to the sea map beside him. There's also one more thing. Tyrion immediately sat up, attentive. What would you have me do? Duncan's eyes lingered on the map, where the phantom image of the White Oak was becoming increasingly visible, its position almost overlapping with that of the sea mist. He turned back to Tyrion and flashed a quick smile. Brace yourself. Tyrion looked puzzled. What? With a casual wave of his hand, Duncan extinguished the ethereal fire in the mirror. As the mirror's luminosity dimmed, Tyrion's voice reverberated from its other side, sounding both bewildered and anxious. Wait, what's happening? Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. A sleek scouting ship with a pristine, gleaming white exterior had suddenly risen from the depths of the ocean. It had come so close to skimming past the back end of the sea mist that the powerful waves it created in its passage made both ships lurch dramatically. Even the seasoned sailors, accustomed to the unpredictability of the sea, couldn't contain their surprise and let out a collective gasp of shock. Upon the startling occurrence, Tyrion hurriedly made his way onto the deck. His attention was immediately drawn to the flurry of activity towards the rear end of the ship. Amongst his crew, Aiden, his second in command, was easily recognizable with his distinctively hairless head. On reaching the edge of the deck, the intruding ship's proximity to the sea mist's rear was alarmingly evident. It was almost as if the two ships had become one. What's happening here? Tyrion, both alarmed and curious, hastened to Aiden, clasping his arm tightly, seeking clarity. Aiden responded in a rush, I have no idea. This ship just appeared out of the blue. My first impulse was to give the command to shoot at them. He continued, visibly shaken, there's been all this talk about mysterious appearances from the depths, and now this. As Tyrion made his way to the stern, he could see the apprehension on the faces of his crew. Many of the sailors had their weapons trained on the unfamiliar ship. Several Marines were already in position by the stern's defensive armaments, their fingers itchy on the triggers. The air was thick with tension. As Tyrion tried to ascertain more details about the unexpected visitor, the silence was shattered by a blaring sound. It was an announcement system being activated from the other ship. A strong voice echoed out, our sincerest apologies. We are the White Oak, a part of the vanished fleet. Our debut journey from this spiritual rise nearly caused a collision due to a mishap. Again, we are the White Oak of the vanished fleet. Hearing the proclamation, Tyrion's face turned stone-like in disbelief while Aiden, trying to keep pace with his captain, looked like he had seen a ghost. The shock was evident on his bald head, which was now dripping with sweat. Stammering, Aiden inquired, Captain, did I hear right? Who exactly are they claiming to be? Lost in thought, Tyrion's mind drifted back to a cryptic message from his father, the final image of his smile, before their connection was abruptly severed. But as he processed the present situation, out of his peripheral vision, he caught sight of something that took his breath away. He approached the deck's edge to take a closer look. While the White Oak itself was clearly visible, its reflection in the water was that of a ghostly ship enveloped in dark shadows and thick mist. Suddenly, a memory clicked. During an earlier encounter in a mist-laden battle, a mysterious ship had darted across, its origins puzzling everyone. And here it was again, right in front of them. By now, the crew had also become aware of the eerie reflection in the water. Recollection flashed in Aiden's eyes, and he exchanged a confused look with Tyrion. Captain, could it be that they're related to the old captains? Remaining outwardly calm, Tyrion replied, the slightest quiver in his voice betraying his emotions, my father always did have his own unique strategies. I never imagined someone in our time would brazenly introduce themselves as part of the vanished fleet, on an open channel. Where did my father discover these people? Do you think they're familiar with the legacy of the sea mist? Aiden asked, uncertainty tinging his voice. How should we approach this? Should we extend a welcoming hand and invite them for a dialogue? We need to discern their intentions. As Aiden spoke, Tyrion was momentarily distracted by a sharp pain in his tooth. Use our radio to request they send an envoy aboard for talks. And let's avoid any more of this vanished fleet broadcast nonsense. Remember, we aren't the only ship docked here. Tyrion, the man soon to take on the titles of city-state governor and pirate king, responded, a hint of exasperation in his voice. Additionally, inform the port authorities. They must have witnessed the unexpected appearance of the white oak. We don't need a panic. A sudden vessel emergence from beneath the waves, especially in these times, was bound to be unsettling. Understood, Captain, Aiden said, nodding before making his exit to carry out the instructions. After some delay, the sea mist successfully established a communication link with the mysterious, white oak. A quick exchange of introductions and explanations followed, culminating in the agreement that the white oak would send a delegate over for direct discussions. Soon after, Tyrion was introduced to the representative from the white oak, a slender man in his prime, donned in a sailor's attire, with short, curly chestnut locks and a discerning yet approachable demeanor. He was accompanied by a young priest. The two stepped onto the sea mist with confident strides. Captain Tyrion, I've been looking forward to this, the middle-aged sailor greeted warmly, a genuine smile gracing his features as he offered a hand to Tyrion. My name is Gus, the first mate of the White Oak, and beside me is our ship's spiritual guide, Mr. Jensen. The scene was slightly surreal for Tyrion. He hadn't anticipated the emissary from a ship, with eerie capabilities like navigating through mirrors and uncharted waters, to be so ordinary, a genial smile, a solid, human physique, full of vivacity and sanity. There were no indications of insanity, no discernible abnormalities, neither physical nor mental. Was this really a representative of the vanished fleet? Someone his father held in esteem? Even with a myriad of questions swirling in his head, Tyrion reached out and firmly shook Gus's hand. I am Tyrion Abnomar, at the helm of the Sea Mist. Though I think our reputations precede us, he remarked, fixing his piercing gaze on Gus, the perplexing and seemingly normal representative of the White Oak. You claim to hail from the vanished fleet. With a glint of amusement in his eyes, Gus responded, indeed. Recent recruits, in fact. He openly appraised Tyrion, the so-called pirate king, with an evident curiosity. Despite Tyrion's somewhat daunting presence, there was an undeniable warmth to Gus. He seemed balanced, unaffected by the bizarre occurrences around him. He didn't bear the look of someone deluded or corrupted by ancient powers. Could this man really be related to Captain Duncan? The sanity of his demeanor raised more questions than answers. Their initial interaction, as new acquaintances of the vanished fleet, was underlined by mutual skepticism. However, the tension soon gave way to mutual recognition and smiles. I recall witnessing your ship during that recent confrontation, Tyrion began, breaking the brief silence. The way your ship maneuvered through the thick mist was indeed memorable. We were en route to the Mirror Frost region at that time, First Mate Gus clarified. Our mission was paramount, and nothing could impede us. Under whose directive? Tyrion probed, his eyes subtly drifting to the young priest, Jensen. And you have a ship's clergyman. Has the Storm Church expanded its reach so widely now? Jensen looked somewhat abashed, a sheepish smile on his face. Until now, the goddess hasn't seen it fit to admonish us. With a playful grin, Gus gestured to the ship's rear. Doesn't the Sea Mist boast a small sanctuary of its own? Tyrion, slightly caught off guard, let out a bemused chuckle. It certainly does. Choosing not to dwell further, Tyrion refocused on Gus. Your sudden appearance here, is it indicative of a specific assignment? We're rendezvousing with our captain, Gus elucidated in a rush. Your captain. Captain Lawrence recently ventured into the mirror world on a terrestrial mission alongside a small team. After accomplishing his task, he, along with gatekeeper Agatha of Frost, planned to re-enter our realm. We've just gotten word that he intends to reunite with the ship, Gus elaborated. Yet, something seems amiss on their end. Miss Martha signaled for our emergence. A complication. Tyrion's brow knitted in concern. Just as he was about to delve deeper, one of his senior sailors swiftly approached, urgently whispering news into his ear. Tyrion's demeanor shifted noticeably. Gus, sensing the tension, inquired, is there an issue? Your captain, might he be an elderly figure, adorned in a pristine white garment, aged around the 6-decade mark, exuding an almost spectral aura. Gus, momentarily flustered, responded, ordinarily, he wouldn't give off a ghostly vibe, but the other descriptions align. Tyrion, sighing, spread his hands in a gesture of resignation. It appears your captain, leading an army of spectral sailors and an animated mummy, is wreaking a bit of chaos throughout our city. He's been requested for a consultation at the Public Security Bureau, mainly due to his inability to extinguish these haunting flames that are inciting widespread panic among the townsfolk. Gus blinked in disbelief, stuttering, "I." Tyrion reassured, "No cause for alarm. The Bureau recognizes they aren't adversaries. Eyewitnesses recount tales of their heroic endeavors against monstrous foes and their aid to our city's defense forces. They won't face any penal consequences. Ah. And also, Archbishop Agatha is currently en route to lend her support. With her testimony, your captain should be free to depart shortly." Good to know. Going forward, it might be wise to maintain discretion about your affiliation with the vanished fleet. It's a delicate subject. Gus nodded in agreement, duly noted. In the well-lit and welcoming room of the Public Security Bureau, a sense of order and calm prevailed, a stark contrast to the chaos that gripped the rest of the city. The room was amply furnished and equipped with refreshments. Tea and coffee were within easy reach for all who entered. The young clerk looked up from his paperwork and asked, "Name?" "Lawrence Creed," replied the man across the table. "Occupation?" "I'm a captain. Captain of the White Oak, to be precise." "Affiliation?" "I belong to the Explorers Association. I hold several senior adventurer qualifications, including certifications in history, mysticism, and other maritime fields." "That pretty much sums it up. And why have you come to Frost?" Lawrence paused, lifting his head to stare at the bright electric light hanging from the ceiling. After contemplating for a few moments, he said, "Originally, I was here to deliver some goods specifically ordered by the cathedral in your city-state." The clerk scribbled down notes diligently, then looked up, his smile friendly yet tinged with a subtle anxiety. "All right, that's recorded. Don't worry, this is standard procedure. We keep records of everyone who comes through here. Frost is grateful for your assistance. Would you like another sugar cube in your coffee?" "No, thank you," Lawrence declined with a wave of his hand. He lifted his cup of coffee for a sip, but being in his current ethereal state, he couldn't taste the drink nor feel its temperature. Setting the cup back on the table, he glanced over his shoulder. A group of sailors sat on the couches at the back of the room, their bodies engulfed in ghostly flames. They had nearly emptied the trays of tea and snacks provided. Despite their spectral forms, which rendered them incapable of tasting food or feeling sensations, they operated on the principle of making the most of their time here. Surprisingly, there was no sense of tension or apprehension in the room, even though they had been invited to the Public Security Bureau for causing a disturbance. This absence of anxiety was partly due to the courteous and almost respectful manner in which the security officers had brought them in. As he pondered this, Lawrence felt a new wave of embarrassment wash over him. Though given his current fiery, spectral appearance, he doubted anyone could discern his emotions. The young clerk, obviously trying to balance curiosity with professional caution, then inquired, "I heard that you initially were helping the gatekeeper in the cathedral district. So why did you and your crew venture into the upper city and cause such a commotion?" Lawrence hesitated, guilt coloring his voice. That was a minor accident. He was at a loss for how to articulate the complex circumstances they found themselves in. Should he be forthright and say that, after an initially energetic and chaotic arrival, his crew still felt adventurous and decided to explore the city? They had planned on buying local specialties to take back to their homeland of Plant, but the ghostly flames they were engulfed in proved hard to control. These flames, which they had momentarily managed to quell, reignited when the sun rose, causing them to literally burst into flames in the middle of a busy intersection. The outcome of this untamed spectacle was a rapid response from the Public Security Bureau, who converged on the scene from 3 different streets. Meanwhile, the residents of the upper city, men, women, and children alike, spread the news of the fiery disturbance as quickly as they could. Lawrence found himself grappling with the complicated truth, hesitant to lay it bare. It wasn't so much about preserving the honor of the vanished fleet. After all, their reputation among mortals was already less than stellar. But even so, they certainly didn't need to add a reputation for causing public disturbances. Choosing to navigate the situation cautiously, Lawrence offered an uneasy laugh and a vague explanation. "We were curious about your city and might have temporarily forgotten to keep our spectral nature under wraps." As if on cue, a crackling burst of green flame ignited on his arm. Casually patting out the flame as if swatting a troublesome fly, Lawrence inspected his chair's armrest to ensure it wasn't scorched. Satisfied, he looked up, locking eyes with the young clerk, offering a subtle yet sincere smile. Are you able to temporarily snuff out these rather conspicuous flames? I'm doing my best to keep them in check, though it may not seem like it, Lawrence replied. Thank you for your cooperation. Please wait here, I need to question your crew members, said the young clerk, visibly unnerved, wiping beads of cold sweat from his forehead as he struggled to maintain an air of professionalism. With a deep breath to steady himself, the clerk turned to the next interviewee waiting beside the table, a rather unsettling figure wearing an antiquated sailor's smock and hat whose body was nothing less than a dried-up mummy. Noticing the clerk's attention, the mummy looked up, grinning grotesquely. Interrogation. Go ahead, ask your questions. All right. Name. The clerk inquired, wiping his forehead again and silently cursing the supervisor who'd stuck him with today's shift. He couldn't help but feel a pang of envy for his colleagues currently on street patrol. Sailor, replied the mummy. Profession. Anomaly. The clerk blinked, visibly confused. Excuse me. Anomaly. Or to be more specific, Anomaly 077, the mummy clarified, gesturing toward its own withered head. The clerk seemed to momentarily freeze, a noticeable gulp breaking the silence. Lawrence decided to intervene. Ahem, the details behind that name are complex, he said, pulling the clerk back from the edge of mental paralysis. Don't worry. Once the representative from your church arrives, I'll make sure to explain everything and complete the proper registrations. Though Lawrence's words hung in the air, the clerk appeared unable to completely digest them. His facial expression fluctuated wildly as if he were about to say something. Before he could articulate his thoughts, however, a whirlwind of ashy dust swept through the room. Emerging from the swirling wind was a blindfolded goddess in a flowing black gown. An otherworldly yet authoritative voice followed her appearance, declaring, I have arrived. On the brink of losing his composure entirely, the clerk latched onto Agatha's entrance like a lifeline, almost leaping out of his seat in relief. Ah, Miss Agatha. You're finally here. The situation is somewhat. I'm aware, which is why I've come personally to manage this, Agatha interrupted, dismissing the clerk with a wave of her hand. She then turned her attention to Lawrence, her pale lips curling into an enigmatic smile. I thought you'd already departed. The room felt charged with an odd blend of tension and relief as eyes turned to see how this intricate web of awkwardness, spectral flames, and mysterious identities would finally be untangled. We had planned to, Lawrence chuckled with a touch of awkward relief. He felt as though a weight had been lifted from his chest. Despite the wild, chaotic journey that had bonded them, one truth was undeniable to both him and Agatha: they were kindred spirits. Agatha appeared to share Lawrence's sense of relief. With a simple wave of her hand, she dismissed the young clerk who had been sweating bullets throughout the interrogation. He scurried out of the room, looking like a man who had just received a royal pardon, glad to be free from the stifling atmosphere. Letting out a deep sigh, Agatha's whole being seemed to exude a combination of fatigue and resignation. Her eyes may have been blindfolded, but her mental faculties were sharp. She signaled for Lawrence and his crew to remain calm as her thoughts resonated audibly, almost as if she were speaking into a hidden communicator. They're here, in the Public Security Bureau. No, the situation isn't dire. They even seem to be enjoying the snacks. Yes, I'll see to the resolution of the matter. No major trouble, just a minor public disturbance. People are on edge these days, you know how it is. I should also report there's a runaway anomaly among them. Codename Sailor, or Anomaly 077. She paused, apparently receiving instructions. Bring them to you. Oak Street. Understood. Finally, Agatha broke the telepathic communication and exhaled deeply, lifting her head in Lawrence's direction. Though her eyes were shrouded in black cloth, it felt as though her gaze penetrated the fabric, placing the grizzled captain under a subtle but definite scrutiny. You were speaking with him, weren't you? Lawrence queried, understanding the gravity of the situation. Yes, and he has issued a command, Agatha responded, her tone becoming grave. He wants to meet with you. Lawrence felt his heart lurch. You mean, the Vanished is anchored in the waters off Frost. Captain Tyrion will provide the coordinates. Your ship, the White Oak, as well as the Sea Mist, are docked nearby. You'll spot them as soon as you approach the harbor, Agatha explained in an almost indifferent manner. Once you're close, your ship will intuitively know where to go. Simply let it navigate itself. At her words, Lawrence swallowed audibly, casting a glance toward his restless crew. Their eyes were wide, each face reflecting a mirroring sense of apprehension. His attention then shifted to the struggling figure of Anomaly 077, who had fallen to the ground and was inching its way toward the exit. Several of his crew members were struggling to restrain the writhing mummy. Refocusing, Lawrence turned his gaze back to Agatha, feeling a knot of tension in his stomach. Did he mention why he wants to meet us? No specific reason, but he indicated it's more of a friendly invitation. So try not to be overly anxious, Agatha began, but before she could finish her thought or Lawrence could respond, Anomaly 077 erupted into a disconcerting cacophony of sobs and growls, shrieking, "I don't believe." Silence him, Lawrence snapped. Taking several deep breaths to center himself, he turned back to Agatha, nodding solemnly. Understood. We will heed the call. The atmosphere in the room felt as if it had thickened, saturated with a cocktail of relief, anxiety, and anticipation, as Lawrence prepared to follow a summons that could define the future for all of them. Relax, you truly have no reason to be this on edge, Agatha said with a light-hearted chuckle, observing the palpable tension among Lawrence and his crew. To set the record straight, he's far friendlier than any of you might be envisioning. I don't doubt it, Lawrence replied, a wistful smile tugging at his lips. But the human mind isn't so easily pacified. I doubt we'll shake off this anxious energy until we've actually stood before him. Fair enough, Agatha conceded, nodding slightly. I wish you and your crew the best of luck. Now, is there anything else you need? Given the current tumult in Frost, my hands are somewhat tied, but I'll assist however possible. Upon hearing her offer, Lawrence seemed to contemplate something for a moment. Slowly, he reached into his jacket and after a brief search, produced a semi-transparent sheet of paper that glowed subtly, as if it had been touched by ethereal flames. He handed the paper to Agatha. And what might this be? She inquired, her eyes narrowing, although hidden behind her blindfold. It's an inventory and damage report pertaining to the shipment for your cathedral. Everything has been delivered to the port as promised, Lawrence said a bit hesitantly. Would it be possible to settle the account now? For a moment, Agatha was rendered motionless. Known as the Gatekeeper of Frost, a temporary archbishop, and the envoy of the Usurper of Fire, she was generally a figure of strength and wisdom. And yet, this unexpected question had her momentarily stunned. After what felt like an eternity but was actually only a dozen or so seconds, the blind priestess finally nodded. Her words came out stiffly as if she were undergoing a particularly uncomfortable dental procedure. Very well. We shall settle it. The room was charged with a blend of relief, awkwardness, and a modicum of humor. It was an unusual scenario, no doubt, but then again, nothing was ever truly usual when it came to their dealings. The winch groaned as it rotated, pulling the steel cables that were stretched to their limit. The elevator cage, a robust structure of iron, emitted a persistent creaking noise as it slowly descended into the depths below. The overwhelming darkness outside the cage was intermittently punctuated by the faint glow of gas lamps placed at intervals on the mine shaft walls. These dim lights, though sparse, were vital in offering a sliver of security and orientation in this subterranean world. Agatha positioned herself near the front of the elevator, her eyes intently observing the descending shaft beyond the safety rails. The profound darkness masked her features, making it difficult for those around her to discern her emotions or the thoughts racing through her mind. It's so incredibly deep, a voice broke the silence within the elevator. It was Alice, standing a little behind Duncan. Her eyes followed the retreating light of the gas lamps on the walls of the shaft. A shiver of anxiety evident in her voice, she added, it feels as though we're sinking right through the city's foundations and plunging into the abyss of the sea. Morris, the elder scholar, remarked from a distant corner of the elevator, absorbed in its mechanical intricacies, this prolonged descent can indeed create such an illusion. In reality, we've likely traveled only a few hundred meters downwards. Alice responded with an elongated, oh, her face awash with wonder, grappling with the enormity of the distance mentioned. Meanwhile, Duncan was somewhat disengaged from the conversation between Alice and Morris. Drawn to Agatha's contemplative stance at the front of the cage, he approached her and remarked to the introspective gatekeeper, "Your mind seems to be elsewhere." Taking a deep breath and pausing momentarily, Agatha replied with an air of depth and introspection, "Ever since we began our descent, I've been overwhelmed with thoughts. They say that my counterpart stood right here, guiding an exploration team deeper into this very metal mine." Her voice wavered, uncertainty evident. She appeared to have had an epiphany about her own existence back then, Agatha continued. The guardians who accompanied her recall her demonstrating an unwavering determination. But they couldn't fathom the reason. Duncan, choosing his words carefully, whispered, "If this duplicate of yours possessed most of your memories and emotions, it's entirely plausible she had a profound understanding of her predicament. A clone can also exhibit resilience and nobility." Agatha remained silent for a while, seemingly drowning in a sea of intricate thoughts. Finally, her voice breaking the stillness, she mused, "I constantly ponder what went through her mind in that instance. What memories flooded back to her? Did she ever feel fear or remorse? She bore my memories, yet her existence spanned merely a few days. Would she have harbored resentment?" Duncan, observing her intently, took a moment before replying, "If you were in her place, would you have held any resentment or regretted your choices?" She answered resolutely, "No, I would not have felt resentment." He nodded slowly, then, undoubtedly, she wouldn't have either. Yet Agatha continued, her voice a mix of sadness and reflection, "However, I believe I'd be riddled with regrets. Dying in this oppressive darkness, my thoughts would invariably wander to the sunlit city-states above, the familiar faces and the places I cherish. As a clone, the thought of not crossing Bartok's gate would haunt me, pondering the uncertainty of possessing a soul. So yes, in her place, I would indeed be consumed by regret." Duncan intently observed Agatha. After a prolonged silence, his attention was drawn to the encroaching darkness surrounding them. "Then she would have felt the same," he murmured, acknowledging Agatha's earlier thoughts. Agatha hesitated, her voice soft, almost as if she were contemplating aloud, "What mysteries await us below? The unknown is precisely why we need to explore," Duncan countered, letting his eyes drift to the other passengers in the elevator. Alice stood nervously to one side, while Morris seemed engrossed in thought. In contrast, Vanna appeared undisturbed by the descent, standing firmly at the center, her arms folded and eyes shut, likely taking a moment of reprieve. Except for these individuals and themselves, the carriage was devoid of additional company. Observing this, Agatha inquired, "You refrained from summoning any of your subordinates and opted just for us. Was it caution that guided this decision? The uncertainties of what lurks below are aplenty, perhaps remnants of ancient deities or the spreading truth. Introducing regular guardians and priests to such unpredictable situations might exacerbate the risks," Agatha replied straightforwardly. "It's clear that neither you nor your associates are perturbed by these potential threats." Duncan, absorbing her words, offered a knowing smile, choosing to remain silent. The elevator's descent began to decelerate noticeably. The sounds of the machinery groaning to a halt, combined with the resounding thud of the lift touching the mine's base, signaled their arrival. "We've reached our destination," announced Agatha. She raised her gaze, inspected the surroundings briefly, then confidently swung the gate open. As she stepped out, she instinctively advised those trailing her, "Exercise caution. The area has only been superficially cleared. The first responders vacated mere hours ago. We truly are venturing into uncharted territory." Mid-stride, she paused, glancing back at Duncan with a sheepish grin, "Though I suppose such warnings might be superfluous for someone like you." Duncan gestured dismissively, conveying his indifference. His eyes once again peered into the ominous tunnel ahead. The sporadic glow of gas lamps scarcely penetrated the engulfing darkness, casting a haunting and indistinct light. Random debris strewn haphazardly, combined with the spine-chilling ambiance, hardly instilled confidence. Reflecting aloud, Duncan remarked, "Perhaps we should have kept Nina aboard a bit longer. Her skills could be beneficial in such gloomy confines." Morris couldn't resist commenting, considering the possibility of her getting startled and inadvertently unleashing a scorching sneeze potent enough to obliterate this entire tunnel, it might have been wise to exclude her. It's advisable to avoid placing young Nina in confined, dimly lit settings, her youth can render her a tad jumpy. Duncan responded with a nonchalant shrug, "Youth is a phase of growth. She's on the brink of completing high school, after all. Morris's facial expression momentarily tensed. After a brief struggle for words, he retorted, Captain, usually high school graduates commemorate their transition to adulthood with festivities or perhaps a vacation. They don't typically plunge into God-forsaken mine shafts as a graduation present. Duncan burst into laughter. An idea seemingly struck him, prompting him to address Vanna. When you turned 17 and had your coming-of-age celebration, how did you mark the occasion? His query was lighthearted, perhaps seeking inspiration for future celebrations for either Nina or Shirley. Caught off guard, Vanna found herself thrust into the limelight. The striking young woman hesitated momentarily, her cheeks flushing with a mix of surprise and mild embarrassment. Pushing through her initial hesitation, she softly admitted, I was busy prepping for my makeup exams for the school year I had to delay. A prolonged silence ensued. Duncan's expression remained unchanged, though the atmosphere felt decidedly more awkward. All he could do was offer a helpless shrug in response. Meanwhile, Agatha, who had been leading the way, abruptly halted and spun around, shooting Duncan a glance full of disbelief. What's the matter? Duncan inquired nonchalantly. Every time I witness your interactions with your followers, it always strikes me as somewhat otherworldly, she remarked. The man I see before me, one who has rediscovered his humanity, is a far cry from the legendary figure tales from the past century painted you as. Now, I think I'm starting to grasp why Captain Lawrence and his crew from the White Oak were such an enigmatic lot. Duncan remained impassive to Agatha's initial comments. Yet, as she delved deeper into her thoughts, his demeanor began to shift subtly. Once she finished, he quickly clarified, for the record, while everyone aboard the White Oak is technically under my command, I'm honestly not particularly intimate with any of them. Agatha offered a nod of agreement. Yes, I'm aware you're not close with them, you've reiterated that point previously. Detecting a hint of jest in her voice, Duncan sighed resignedly. And how did things end up with Lawrence's cargo list? With the current demands at Frost, we're in desperate need of supplies. We've always been sticklers for upholding our end of contracts. Now that the merchandise has been delivered, naturally, the next logical step would be remittance, Agatha began, pausing to shake her head slightly. However, we can only manage partial payment. Duncan raised an eyebrow. Why's that? The most pivotal piece of cargo, Anomaly 077, has proven uncontrollable and hence, non-deliverable, she detailed. Our agreement mandated that the White Oak hand over the sailor in a secured state to the Frost's Relics Hall. What wasn't part of the deal was an animated mummy. Agatha continued, revealing a tidbit. Interestingly enough, the mummy seemed positively thrilled about its inclusion in the delivery list. Upon learning it was destined for Frost, it nearly burst into tears of joy. Yet, we're at a loss about how to manage an anomaly that's been uncontrollable for such an extended period and can't be secured any longer. It seems prudent to entrust this to your expertise. An anomaly that's been uncontrollable for an extended period. Duncan murmured pensively, his gaze inadvertently drifting sideways. Alice, sensing Duncan's gaze, turned to face him. An elated expression blossomed across the visage of the doll-like lady, eliciting a chuckle, hee. Duncan exhaled a resigned sigh, admitting, I guess I do have some experience in that department. Agatha's eyes instinctively shifted to Alice, a blend of emotions evident in her expression. By now, Duncan had enlightened her regarding the actual origins of this Miss Doll. Being a native of Frost, Agatha was fully cognizant of just how anomalous it was for Anomaly 099 to be wandering freely within its bounds. Innumerable queries swirled in her mind, accompanied by a burning curiosity and an unsettling feeling in her previously unyielding heart. Yet, Duncan's apparent indifference deterred her every time she considered answering her questions. Finally, she mustered the courage to voice her thoughts, breaking the ongoing silence. But, as she was about to broach the subject of Alice, an unexpected surge of anxiety abruptly silenced her. At the same time, everyone on the team stopped in their tracks. Agatha turned her head, looking towards the deepest end of this profound, long alleyway. Beneath the thick black cover, her vision, already heightened in the flames, wavered, trembled, and distorted. It was as if an invisible wind was blowing against her face, and countless chaotic voices were mixed in that wind, assaulting her senses. She felt her consciousness being disturbed. A massive presence from deep within the tunnel. No, strictly speaking, the remnants left by a massive presence, was resonating with her sanity. She couldn't see what was there, but she could feel a faint echo within that vast and unparalleled remnant. That faint echo was softly beckoning her to come over. What's over there? The blind priestess asked. She subconsciously reached out, seemingly trying to steady her somewhat shaky body. A slightly large but distinctly feminine hand reached out from the side. Vanna had reached out and supported Agatha, lifting her gaze towards the immense darkness at the end of the tunnel. It seems like a hollow tunnel, Vanna murmured, her tone carrying a trace of tension, a vast hollow tunnel. The tunnel came to an abrupt halt as though the very earth and ceiling had been sucked into an unseen vortex, fading away into an impenetrable obscurity. Standing at this uncanny juncture, it felt as if the sheer emptiness ahead was a palpable force pressing down on Vanna. Even as an inquisitor skilled in facing the unknown, she felt a deeply rooted primal fear of the abyss swell within her like a surging tidal wave. Morris, trailing behind Vanna, arrived at the edge of this mysterious abyss. Lifting his lantern, he found that its light seemed almost consumed by the surrounding darkness. Rather than disappearing completely, the light became overpowered, unable to pierce the gloom. It only managed to weakly reveal a precipitous slope along one side of the chasm, while the vast majority of the space remained veiled in shadow. This isn't typical of any mining structure I know, Vanna commented cautiously, casting a quick glance back at the normal mine shaft they had followed to reach this unsettling location. It's as though the regular passage just cuts off here. This spot matches the stone wall mentioned in those investigative reports. Bending down to scrutinize a small area of the chasm wall, which was barely illuminated by his lantern, Morris mused, it's as if some immense entity once filled this entire space, and with its absence, all that remains is this gigantic void. Duncan, noticeably concerned, furrowed his brows. How is it that such a massive cavity has stabilized and not collapsed? If it does, the repercussions for the city above could be disastrous. Shifting his focus to Agatha, Duncan queried, you've seemed uneasy for a while. Are you all right? Agatha hesitated before speaking, I can't see this void you're talking about. What I sense is a cacophony, a large, distorted echo filled with the sound of wind. Are you sure there's truly nothing beyond this point? There's absolutely nothing I can see, and no detectable trace of any residual supernatural energies, Vanna confirmed confidently, then pondered aloud, but if you're sensing something, it could mean there's some sort of resonance between you and whatever residual energies might still linger here. Shaking her head, Agatha turned towards Duncan and asked, what do you think we should do? Duncan seemed resolute. We must go in and investigate. With a wave of his hand, he conjured a ghostly green flame. From it emerged a skeletal bird, wreathed in the same eerie fire, which alighted on his shoulder. I, observing the scenario unfold, chirped, the veteran has arrived. The veteran is here. To mitigate the risk of a cave-in, we're bringing this bird with us, Duncan elaborated. Once we're inside, stick close together and keep your eyes on the ceiling and the walls for any signs of instability. Should there be any indication of a collapse, we'll teleport everyone out immediately. Captain. Understood. Got it. Hee hee. Gently patting Alice's head, Duncan reassessed the uneven terrain at the edge of the abyss before boldly taking the first step into the encompassing darkness. The rest of the group followed suit. As they ventured into the void, they encountered a steep, uneven slope. The path was far from straightforward, regularly interrupted by jagged terrain and labyrinthine forks that demanded their utmost caution. This treacherous incline seemed to plunge deep into the very core of the enshrouded void as if leading them toward its mysterious, hidden depths. The path they treaded on seemed like a deep indentation in the stone as if molded by a substance long since eroded away. Duncan moved deliberately through the dark, his ethereal green flames silently emanating from his feet as he walked. This spectral fire cast a muted glow within a limited radius around him, creating a vibrant trail of flames behind him. Anyone looking back could see this phosphorescent line undulating its way through the shadows, forming a vivid outline that traced their route back to the mouth of the void. In a place where darkness stretched infinitely, setting markers for the way back was absolutely critical. While the spectral dove was their ultimate safeguard for an emergency escape, Duncan didn't take any chances. He left a trail of these flames as they ventured further. These spiritual fires were more than just markers, they extended his sensory perception, allowing him to detect any minute shifts or changes in the surrounding cave walls. In Vanna's grip, a sword had materialized, crafted from shards of frozen storm. She wielded it in one hand, her senses keenly attuned to the potential threat of any lurking creatures concealed in the impenetrable dark. Beside her, Alice nervously clutched her own head, anxious that she might stumble and plummet into the abyss. Agatha, still disoriented by the peculiar echo that clouded her perception, relied on Vanna's steadying arm to negotiate the uneven terrain. Meanwhile, Morris was engrossed in a close examination of the rocks lining their path. The stone here is exceptionally dense, almost as though it's been compacted together, he observed, lifting his lantern to peer into the distance. The silver light from the lantern flickered in his eyes as he added, if the entire cave is composed of rock strata like this, it could explain its surprising stability, even after whatever once filled it has long disappeared. The stone forms a thick, heavy, inner shell that gives structural support. Pausing, he added cautiously, however, it's puzzling. For a cavity of this magnitude, a single layer of dense stone would hardly be sufficient for support. There must be additional structural features. Intrigued, Vanna couldn't resist asking, how much do you actually know? My interests span mathematics, history, chemistry, mysticism, physics, a smattering of geology and mining, and of course, combat, firearms, mechanics, and explosives, Morris listed nonchalantly. Vanna found herself speechless. How did you become so knowledgeable? Reading a lot of books helps, Morris shrugged, after all, I am a historian. Vanna glanced at Morris, puzzled. She mused on how the majority of the topics he mentioned were not typical prerequisites for a historian. But after a moment's hesitation, she chose not to comment. Agatha, supported by Vanna, appeared to be deep in thought. She was once again profoundly intrigued by the eclectic expertise of one of Captain Duncan's crew. The last time she was this struck was when she learned that Vanna was an athlete. Yet Morris seemed entirely unaware of the sense of awe he had inspired in the others. His focus had already returned to the peculiar stones beneath their feet. Illuminated by the glow of the green flame and his lantern, the rocks displayed an understated metallic gleam. Upon closer look, they seemed to bear intricate patterns, unless his eyes were playing tricks on him. Curious, the elderly scholar bent down to pick up a fragment for closer examination. Suddenly, he froze. Noticing this, Duncan also halted and peered at the rock fragment in Morris's hand. Is there a problem? He inquired, his voice tinged with concern. After a pause that seemed to stretch for an eternity, Morris finally snapped out of his reverie, his voice tinged with a sense of wonder, it's raw ore. Astonishingly, it's almost pure enough to fuel a steam core reactor directly. Agatha swiveled her head sharply at his words. Raw ore. Indeed, Morris confirmed, almost in disbelief. He hastily bent down to pick up another fragment and then crouched to examine the sea of stones around his feet. The more he looked, the more his eyes widened with awe and apprehension. No wonder, I thought the texture of these so-called stones felt strange, but I couldn't pinpoint why due to the low lighting. Suddenly, the elderly scholar looked up, locking eyes with Duncan and Agatha. His face was a mask of incredulous amazement, coupled with the gleam of groundbreaking discovery. Captain, Agatha, this cave, or at least the ground we're standing on, is made entirely of raw ore. The air seemed to freeze as every member of the party digested the monumental implications of Morris's discovery. Duncan sensed a heightened emotional tension emanating from Agatha while Vanna felt her hand trembling ever so slightly. For a native of Frost, no one understood the gravity of discovering raw ore better. We've stumbled upon new veins in the mine, Vanna finally said, her voice quivering with restrained emotion as she tightened her grip on Agatha's hand. It appears Frost won't be plagued by scarcity for some time. True, we've found a trove, Agatha mumbled, her voice laced with a complex mixture of relief, wonder, and apprehension. But why is this here? Duncan knitted his brows, puzzled. Could it be that the corrosion from the Netherlord actually generates raw ore? According to our intelligence, that entity was responsible for creating this massive void. The atmosphere shifted instantaneously, becoming charged with a grave solemnity. Even Alice, who often missed the gravity of situations, sensed the change. The puppet pulled gently at Duncan's sleeve and timidly asked, Captain, what exactly is raw ore? Duncan sighed. Amidst the seriousness of the moment, Alice remained blissfully obtuse. Raw ore is the cornerstone of modern industry, Duncan explained patiently. It's the fuel that powers steam-driven machinery. Just as humans need food to live, machines require raw ore for operation and manufacturing. Alice listened with a look that suggested she was only halfway following, and after a prolonged pause, she finally nodded, oh. Duncan decided not to ponder whether Alice had actually grasped the concept. Instead, his eyes returned to the impenetrable darkness ahead. His curiosity had morphed into an insatiable hunger to know more. If the cave they were now traversing was constructed of such a high purity of raw ore, what other unimaginable secrets could be lurking in its deepest recesses?